Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are your source for messy, imperfect, secular, progressive homeschool community. I'm your host, Amanda, and my awesome co host is.
Hello, I'm Megan.
We are so glad you found us. The number of how do I not know this exists type of messages that we get every week is no small thing. So, hooray, you're here, right? And yes, progressive homeschool community does exist. Here, we believe that Black Lives Matter, love is love, your body, your choice, and that hate never made any country great.
Exactly. So you can settle in and relax here. We won't start talking about flat Earth or start promoting the Tuttle twins mid-episode. We promise. Relax. Today we'll be talking about how to answer a question that you've probably heard somewhere along the way in your kids' educational journey so far. And I'm willing to bet that you probably asked this question when you were a student as well. We're going to be talking about, when am I ever going to use this information? So it's a common question. But first, we kick off every episode with a recap of our weeks. As Amanda said, we are messy. We don't show up and profess that everything is perfect. If we had a great week, we're going to tell you we had a great week. If the week was a shit show, we're going to tell you that too. So how's your week, Amanda?
My week has been a little harder than usual for a very privileged reason. So this week we're in Cyprus. I'm recording from a lovely hotel room here in Cyprus. And so again, I fully own the fact that we're very fortunate to be here learning in person. We've learned a ton. We took a great tour, all of that jazz. It's just all the little things, right? Like travel is stressful. I had this crazy layover. We booked this cheap ticket, and it meant that we had a layover in London, which meant I got to meet Meagan in person, which was wonderful. But it also meant I had to go through security in London. And anyone who flies knows that like England is just the worst place to try to go through security. And so, of course, they took all of my like curly hair shampoo and conditioner and cream stuff away because I had them all in travel containers that were not marked 100 milliliters. And because the company had not marked 100 milliliters on my travel container, she could not possibly know how much was in there. And therefore, she had to take it. And I was just like, seriously? So, like it's just the little things. And for whatever reason, my phone charger doesn't work in the thing here. And so every morning I wake up and my phone is completely dead. And then I have to try to quickly charge it before I go to breakfast. And we're trying to record and my computer's not working properly. So I'm using the kiddo's computer and the Wi-Fi is bad. And I still have to check in for our flights to go home tomorrow. And I was just like, this was supposed to be a fun, easy, good trip, and it's not really working out that way. And then on top of all of that, it's totally awesome, right? Like, again, this is another one of those like two sides to every coin. It's awesome, but we have a ton of people trying to join our Facebook community. And we've had the community for a while. It had a nice group in it. With everything that's going on in the United States right now, like lots of people are looking for progressive homeschool community. Again, awesome, wonderful, but it's hundreds of people a day. And we make like a point of actually like really looking through each profile to try to preserve the integrity of this progressive safe space that we're creating, right? So we're going in, we're looking at the groups that you're in, the groups we have in common, we're checking to see what kind of posts you've made. If you're happy about Mike Huckabee coming to talk in your state, you're not going to get to join the group, like
It's not happening.
doing all of this. Again, like I said, it's wonderful, but your posts, you're going through, you're approving them, and it's like 73 and you approve one, and then you would expect it to go down to 72 left, but instead it goes up to 75 and you're like, so
I know.
yeah,
The profiles where I go on and there's a frame around the person's profile photo and their cover photo, their cover photo is like something about, it'll be that like the thing with the uterus where the ovaries are like flipping the bird, like that graphic image or whatever. And then they've got like a rainbow thing around their profile picture. I'm like, oh, thank you. It's like a really quick and easy check. Some of them we have to scroll. I mean, I scrolled through one the other day for like ages, and then Amanda and I swapped them back and forth, and we're like, look at this disgusting. I mean, some of the stuff that we come, it's toxic too, right? Like the ones that we're letting in are amazing and we're so happy to be building that community. But the ones that we're not, holy crap, they're toxic, right? Like it is some really disgusting shit that's trying to weasel its way into the group. So Amanda's in Cyprus, and I was like, I'll tackle the join requests, but we're up over like 200. So I think this afternoon I'm just going to pop on like a limited series on Netflix and just scroll through and welcome all kinds of new friends and digest all the hate and send it to Amanda and be like, ugh, can you believe this person tried to join our group? And then we'll move on. But it's awesome. Yeah. So if you're not in the Facebook community, it's the same name, Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, has a tagline that says like, what does it even say? It's like secular and progressive as fuck or something. Like, just to be super clear that you're in the right group. So come join us. We will get to we are slow with the join requests because we vet them all, but we will get there. So we will get you in, provided you don't have Trump with his stupid ear band-aid as your profile photo. We will get you in. So, because we've seen a few of those.
Yeah.
Um,
Trolls will troll. I don't
mm,
understand why. I want the energy. I want the energy they have to be like, I'm gonna go in this space where it's clearly not meant for me, and I'm gonna try to get in there and cause problems. Like, I don't
yeah,
I don't have that kind of energy, and I'm kind of jealous, but also like just you have plenty of spaces. Like hang out in
stay
your
in your
space
lane.
and leave our space to us.
Yeah, I don't get it. Well, and I wouldn't want to digest that sort of like you couldn't pay me to go hang out in some MAGA group. Like you couldn't pay me. I don't want that sort of aggravation in my life, watching all this other stuff and just getting annoyed by it all the time. Like, ugh, no, thank you.
Yep.
Not cool. So yes, we're tackling them as fast as we can. Yeah. So it was, I agree, super exciting that we got to meet this week. We'd never met before in person. We've been friends for like I thought about it the other day. It was like 4 years that we've been friends now, which is
Yeah.
bananas. And we'd never met before. And so it just kind of lined up that we are on a world schooling pet sitting trip right now. And Amanda was going to be passing through. And so we got to meet. So that was the highlight of my week for sure. It was a quick and easy trip. Wasn't quick, but it was an easy trip to the airport. Just based upon my proximity in the city to where the airport was. It wasn't quick, but it was definitely easy. So that was good. So yeah, but it's been a good week on our end. I mean, we're pet sitting. We were pet sitting last week. I've talked about it before. Trusted house sitters. You can travel all over the place, stay at people's houses, take care of their amazing animals. And then you get to adventure in that place too. And it's like, I don't know. I think I pay like $16 a month or something. So it's a budget friendly way to world school if you're looking to get out and about a little bit and not quite sure how people accomplish this kind of stuff. There's some tricks to the trade. Yeah, so that's good. So I've just been kind of catching up on life, admitting people to the Facebook group, all that kind of stuff. My boys are up in Birmingham. We're in London. My boys are up in Birmingham for the weekend playing in a huge Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. So I took the train up there with them yesterday and got them situated and all that. And then this weekend, just kind of having a quiet weekend at home, which feels pretty good. So yeah, just status quo on my end, which is sometimes a good thing. It's nice. All right, so back to our main episode topic for the week. Awesome sauce. The topic of when am I ever going to use this information? Okay, now if you're new to the podcast, Amanda and I homeschool quite differently.
Yeah. So that's one way to put it. No, it's so true. Right. I am definitely an academic aggressive homeschooler. We live in California and currently homeschool through a homeschool charter program, which is technically a public school program. Though soon we will probably be switching to PSA. We balance in our home, we balance structured requirements, interest led learning, world schooling, and really a whole bunch more. But we lean very hard into the academic side. We're very curriculum focused, book focused, product focused. We do standardized testing and all of those sorts of things, right? And we're quite happy doing that. My kiddo enjoys it. I enjoy it. That is not the way Meagan homeschools.
No, I am a question the root of everything loosey goosey unschooler. I have joked in the past that I am a burn the establishment down type, which was a fitting description, I felt like, right? But now that the US is actually considering dissolving the Department of Education. I think I need to find a new phrase to describe myself because I don't want anyone thinking that that's some sort of hidden messaging signal that shows that I agree with that decision. That is clearly a shit idea, and I don't support that one bit. I do think that the US education system is in big trouble and not doing well. But even if I thought that this circus act of an administration could effectively dismantle and rebuild the Department of Education, I don't think the wrestling lady would be my pick for the job. Like, that's just so. I need a new description for myself. But I digress. I think we will vary quite a bit on how we approach this topic. And as Amanda likes to say, I prepare way too many notes for our podcast. So today's probably going to be one of those days, but I'm excited. Let's dive in.
Yeah. So this is going to be an interesting conversation because here's the thing. We knew when we started this podcast, we'd have varying opinions, but it is a great opportunity to show that you can approach homeschooling from so many different angles and still have super happy, successful kiddos. And you can still respect your friends who are doing it differently. These days, we're hearing all of this crap about how we can disagree and still be friends. And, like we say, you can't disagree with fundamental human rights and still be friends. Like we're pretty clear on that here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. But we do believe that you can absolutely choose to homeschool differently and still be friends. That's what this podcast is all about.
Yeah, bingo. We're very selective in the agree to disagree, right? We're never going to agree to disagree on someone's right to existence or a peaceful existence and a safe existence. But when it comes to I like unit studies and Amanda doesn't, we found common ground. We're good. We're okay with that sort of agree to disagree. So let's dive in. Has Winston ever asked you this question before in your homeschooling adventure?
So I don't think that question has ever actually been asked in our home. And so I think that this conversation is going to be an interesting one and a great example of the fact that different things work for different families. So I think that this specific question, this idea of like, well, when am I ever going to need this or when am I ever going to use this? There's probably kind of two parts to it. First, to me, is a general idea and philosophy that people never know who they're going to become or what they're going to do in life. So you never know what skills you're going to need later on down the road. And for me, that's definitely true. I jumped around a lot in my professional career, done a lot of different things. And so I pull on a lot of different skills from a lot of different times in my life. So there's that kind of general school of thought. And then the other side of it for me is I think it's different if you have a kid who is really talented or focused on a single thing versus if you have what's called a multi-potentialite, right? Someone who has lots of interests, but not a specific focus. And that definitely applies to our house, both me and my kiddo. So, you know, if that question was asked in our home, my answer would be like, I have no idea. I couldn't even begin to guess when you might need this in your life or your career. Isn't that amazing? Like, maybe you will, maybe you won't, but you'll know it. And that's pretty cool in and of itself. But I fully realize that that is not how everyone approaches things.
So true. And so the interesting thing is, so I have 3 kids, and one of mine I would classify as a multi-potentialite who will still totally ask this question because if it's, but I think part of that also maybe is just the culture that we've both established from such early ages, right? Where the culture that you've established has been one of what you just said, right? Like, I have no idea when you're going to need this, but like, let's dive in, let's figure it out. And it's so cool. It might pop up one day and surprise you when you least expect it, right? And because our culture has been so interest focused, my multi-potentialite is like, I'm never using this. This is like this. What? Why on earth are we on this? Right. And so I think maybe that's part of it too, right? Is kind of that cultural foundation that's been laid early on with each of us that's so different. And again, not better, worse, or whatever. It's just different.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that difference in where you're coming from, both in homeschooling, but just generally in life, right? Like, I don't know. We're probably one of those families that would all love to be on Jeopardy. I'd fail miserably at this point because my brain fog is so bad. But like, oh, yeah, I know a little bit about everything. Let's do it. Have fun.
Yeah, I like it. It's interesting that you bring that up too, because we're doing a group read, and then the kids are also some of them are individually reading Les Miserables because we're going to see the play in a couple of weeks, and they're not super, I mean, they understand the concept, whatever, but I kept saying to them, like, this is one of those things that's like a cultural reference, right? There's in Ted Lasso, there's a reference about when Beard goes to Nathan's house and is like, yes, I stole a loaf of meth. It's very similar to Les Mis, right? And Chapel Roan was at the Grammys last week, and they said there were some, between her staging and her choice of garment at one point at the event, there was some Les Mis stuff like stuck in there that was kind of insinuating it revolution that's going on right now in the world, right? And so I was saying, like, there are these things. I mean, we had the unaliving of the United Healthcare CEO in the fall, and there were all these comments on social media about, revolution period in France and stuff. And I'm like, no, kids, like this is one of those things, like, even if it's not super your jam, we're going to see the play. I spent a fortune on the tickets. So it would be amazing if you knew the story going into it. But then also, it's like just one of those cultural pieces that's interesting to know. So we kind of teeter on some of that stuff, like where it's like interesting to know whether you're interested or not, or cultural foundational information versus when am I ever going to use this? And so I don't think the line is as black and white as maybe we can define it even in this episode, which is interesting.
So I assume that this question has popped up in your household, probably more than once, more than 3 times, more than once from each kid.
Oh, yes, for sure. Most definitely. And I'll say this question is part of what led us to unschooling. Now, okay, I shared way back in our very first episode, we started talking about what kind of homeschooler are you in your first episode. And when we first started homeschooling ages ago, I took 1,000,001 of these "What type of homeschooler are you?" quizzes. You can Google for them if you've never taken them before. They're also on our link tree that's like on our Instagram profile and stuff like that. But they all would come back unschooling, 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 or some variation of that that was like eclectic or something along those lines. Basically, all of them were circling the concept of being super loosey-goosey. But I resisted that hardcore. I never one to be swayed by an online quiz. I was like, that's ridiculous." I think for a couple of reasons, right? Mainly my knowledge of unschooling was incomplete and somewhat ill-informed. And that kind of informed my knee-jerk reaction to being like, we're not doing that. So in the early days, even when we were doing book work and group unit studies and things like that, there was like an undercurrent of unschooler that was in our culture because the quizzes were picking up on it pretty consistently. So it's not a quantum leap to see how we ended up getting there. Apparently, we were always unschoolers at heart. We were doing something that was against our grain. But when we were in our workbook online learning phase of homeschooling at the beginning, the kids were constantly asking this, when am I ever going to use this? Like, what is this? And to be honest, my inability to answer the questions frustrated them a whole lot over time, or my inability to help them with some aspects of grammar or math or something like that, even in their early years of education, just shone this huge bright light on how little I used the stuff. Cause I'd be like, I remember learning this when I was in school, but I've never used it. I have to Google it. I have to go back to square one. And so, they would ask me a question like, I need an example of a subjunctive mood in conditional clauses with past perfect pretense. And I'd just sit there and be like, the fuck are you even talking about? Right. I mean, there's just, here I am. I had just left my corporate job. I had been overseeing a pretty integral department in a global pharmaceutical giant for a decade and not using, and I think I'm being generous here, 90% of what I had learned in my very overpriced education. It became harder and harder for me to justify answering that question to my kids. So slowly but surely, I began to really question, like, how much is this stuff necessary when I wasn't using it myself. And what was the best way for my kids? I'm not talking about your kiddo, Amanda, or anyone else's kiddo, but what was the way for my kids to best learn the skills that I thought they were going to need and use in the adult world? So we made a little pivot.
Okay, so we have plenty more to discuss. Don't go anywhere. But in the meantime, we want to say a big thank you to our premier sponsor, Hub of Curiosity. So they offer classes on OutSchool that are top rated and super popular. As OutSchool parents, we know that OutSchool can be quite spendy. We're not going to lie about that, right? But the nice thing about Hub of Curiosity is that they recently did a major revamp, and now all of their classes, group and self-paced, through Hub of Curiosity are $12 or less. You don't need a coupon. It isn't one of those introductory price things. You're not going to, as long as you don't put it on pause, it'll stay at $12. But if you put a pause on it, it's going to jump up to $25, or there's none of that business. Their classes are high quality, budget friendly. They're just generally really great classes. They cover all kinds of things. There's multisensory classes for multiplication and spelling, engineering classes where you explore every component inside a car. There's baking and sewing. They just offer all kinds of things, and some of them rotate and change throughout the year. Definitely something for everyone, right? So if you have never used OutSchool before, we have a link in our description. And if you use that link, you'll receive $20 off your first class. It doesn't have to be a Hub of Curiosity class. It's a general OutSchool link, but you could definitely apply it towards that. And as always, if you have questions, please feel free to ask us. We are happy to help you with this resource or with lots of other things. Okay, so back to the question of the day. So if your kid, Megan, is all, when am I ever going to use this? Hopefully they're not so whiny because they're teenagers, but they're teenagers. So maybe they do have whiny moments. What are you saying? Right now in this part of the episode, I'm supposed to share an amusing antidote, but I honestly don't think I have one. When I was trying to think about it for this episode, I was kind of stumped. And the only thing I could come up with was maybe when my kiddo asked something similar to this about taking golf lessons. Now, we initially started golf early in the pandemic as a way for him to be doing some sort of sport that was outside, and he could be taking lessons, but it would be, one-on-one or very small group. And initially that was great. It worked really well for us. A little bit later on, he did ask, oh, why am I doing this? Do I have to keep doing it? And in our house, right, I just explained, well, look, if you end up in the business world, there's a very good chance you'll be left out of a lot of important opportunities if you can't play golf. It, like it or not, it is what it is. And he was just kind of like, oh, okay. And that was kind of the end of that pushback there. Now, realistically, we talked more about it. We talked more about what that means. And I gave examples of, this is what I have seen with our own family. I know your dad has to go play golf sometimes. And I know your grandpa had to learn golf at a much older age because he found that people at work were getting promotions when they were the ones that went to golf with everyone else. And he didn't want to, be left out in the cold over that. And, talking through those kinds of things. But truly, that's the only time I can really think of in our house. But I'm going to guess that it's happened in your house and you definitely address it differently.
So I was laughing a little bit while you were talking because there's a Friends episode when Rachel gets this job and her boss and then the other girl in the department were smokers. And so they would be, there'd be something on the table for discussion and those two would go up to the roof for a smoke break and they'd come down and they'd have figured it all out. And the other girl in the department would have gotten the primo tasks or something, and so Rachel decides to take up smoking to help her career. So I'm thinking, it's a comedy, so it was a much different example as far as the way it plays out and all that kind of stuff. But I was laughing because it's so true, right? All right. As we prepared for this episode, I went on the hunt for studies that might show how much of the standard US education is actually used in adult life. And I know we have listeners from around the world, but the vast majority of our listeners are in the US. So I have to say, it was a bit like looking for a needle in a haystack. There are tons of studies talking about how higher education equals better paying jobs. But it was interesting because rarely in those studies does it link the actual education to the job itself or the higher pay. It's more a matter of the fact that the person has that piece of paper, has that credential, has that experience, right? And we went into this at length in our book club during season 1 when we talked about Better Than College. If you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. Neither one of us are full out anti college. I think it's fair to say Amanda's super pro college. My kids have all experienced college, even in high school. We also understand the benefits of trade school and technical school. But we kind of talked about the societal game, right? Like, especially now with AI being introduced and stuff like that, like how many resumes are just filtered right into the trash because it's looking for a degree. It's whether or not we think college is necessary for success, society thinks that in so many ways, right? And so there will be some limitations. So I have some internal struggle there when it comes to that. But anyway, go listen to those episodes. We did a really big deep dive on kind of the pros and cons of all of that stuff in when we read that book. So I did find a study by H&R Block. I know, super scientific, right? Might as well be like Harvard Medical School here, H&R Block. So this is what the study found. And then I'm going to add some qualifications to the study at the end, but hang with me for a second. So they studied 2,000 adult Americans. And the conclusion of this super scientific study was that they use about 37% of the information that they learned in school. They said they found that about 84% of people learned things in school that they've never used after graduation. And the average respondent also said that over half of the skills that they use in the workforce were learned on the job rather than in school. So they offered up options to these people that they were querying and forced to choose between taking a traditional calculus class and a tax preparation class. 13% said they would take calculus. Another 17% that they said that they would take an algebra class over household repairs or skills and things like that. The top 5 skills that respondents said that they wanted to learn in school were money management and budgeting, how to do taxes, how to manage your well-being, understanding loans, and how to negotiate, which is pretty interesting. Now, that's not to say you can't follow the complete standard California path that Amanda loves and still teach those things, right? It's not like an either or, like you can only unschool and teach these skills. Like that's not at all what I'm saying. It went on to say that the 5 most useless things that these people who were polled said that they learned in school were a Pythagorean theorem. I would agree with that.
I have
Knowing
to
this
say,
high.
just this week, Winston was like, the Pythagorean theorem? Why am I having to learn that?
Just ask the question.
Well, there was a little more. It was more like, do I have to already be learning that? And I was like, I don't know. Is now when they cover it? Because that's why you're learning it now. I don't know. He's like, shouldn't I have to do that later? Isn't it high school or something? I was like, I don't really.
Yeah. All right. Pi being 3.14 was on their list of things they've never used. The periodic table, types of rocks, and the difference between protons, neutrons, and electrons. Over 89% say life would be easier if they had learned practical skills in school, while the average person said that they didn't truly grasp adult skills until the age of 29.
Okay, can I just say that I hope most of them were wrong when they said they never used the periodic table. I hope most of the people who were responding to this are smart enough to know that all things are made up of elements from the periodic table. Like the number of people on social media who don't seem to understand that like basic principle, like yeah, I'm just gonna say, like, I hope that when they took chemistry, they figured out this idea that like everything is made up of the elements from the periodic table. That's how life works. Okay. That's
So I would agree with that. I took chemistry. I got an A in chemistry. And I remember that strictly because at the end of the year, I was like, I got an A in this class and I don't know shit about chemistry. I was just really good at the calculations. I quite like algebraic equations. It's the way my brain works. I'm okay with algebra. And I do see those memes that go around like another day that I've never used algebra as an adult. And I'm like, I think there's plenty of things that we don't use from our educations, but algebra, I don't think is one of them. I think people just don't
Use it
realize
all the
how often they're
time.
using algebra.
Yeah, that's
Like,
another one of those. You use it all the time, but people are like, I never use an algebraic equation. Like, actually, yes, you do. Every time you're
have you
trying to
ever doubled the
figure
recipe? I've used algebra. Like,
yeah, or you were like, oh, what kind of gas mileage did I get this month? Or how do I need to buy gas before we hit the road for this, like whatever trip we're taking? Hello, algebra.
algebra, right? Yeah. So I would agree with that. And so that's why I was good at chemistry, was because the equations that we were doing in chemistry were fairly algebraic in nature. However, and yes, I totally understand everything is made out of elements. Do I need to know which of those elements are heavier or lighter or how much they weigh and how to figure out how many joules of energy are in each one? I've never freaking used that a day in my life. Like, I think knowing the periodic table exists is important, right? And all of that. But spending a year, an actual year of my life on that subject was a bit much for my taste. And I've never used it a day in my life. So I will say that. Now, I'm a huge fan. So we talked about this H&R Block study, right? I'm a huge fan of who did the study and what was their angle. I mean, I said at the beginning, I'm a question everything. You very like, why? But why? Why do we have to do it that way? Why is it done this way? Right. So, given the source of the study, that seems clear what their angle was. Obviously, they're looking to say people are not prepared to do their own taxes and blah, blah, blah. But you also really need to factor in like how they ask the questions. Like if they showed up to this study and they were like, now, would you rather take calculus or would you have found it helpful to know how to do your taxes as an adult? And they're asking them like during tax season when it's stressful. Of course, you know what people are going to say, right? So I would have preferred to have found a different study. But the truth is there just aren't like why isn't anyone studying that? I mean, hello. Like we put in how many gazillions of dollars into education every year and nobody's studying formally if you actually need the stuff that's okay, fine. So I truly wouldn't be surprised if I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if a less biased source found similar responses though, right? Amanda, how many pictures of fucking clouds did you identify as a kid in school? Like, I have never, as an adult, never needed to know if it's a cumulonimbus cloud in my life, like ever. And that was a massive subject that we went.
I do it all the time. We still
Like-
do it. No, yeah, like, oh, that cloud means there's a storm coming or there's rain coming. Like that cloud means there's not because it's high in the sky. Like
But
these
the
things
average
are
human can look
useful.
outside. Like, I'm looking outside right now. The weather is shit. If I go outside, I need an umbrella. Like,
To know what's happening.
but I can do that without naming the clouds. It's pretty common sense.
Yeah, you have no idea. Cloud has rain in it. Unless you know what kind of cloud it is.
Okay. Okay. How did indigenous people who did not know that they were called cumulonimbus clouds, how sad and how sad their life must have been, right? They knew the cycle of the weather. They knew, what crops to plant. They knew when it was going to be a harsh winter based upon looking at the signs of nature.
Are
So
you
I'm
going
like,
to
but you can
move?
pick
Are you
those
going to
things.
spend all of your time outside and just tracking the weather so that you know it without learning it in school? Like,
I'm gonna ask Alexa. Still don't need to know the name of the clouds.
and again, it's that thing. Like, I feel the same way with that as I do the periodic table. Do I feel that everyone needs to memorize the periodic table and there's like a fundamental like knowledge of memorizing the entire periodic table? No, I don't think that's necessary. I think for most people, that's busy work for the sake of busy work. But I do think that there's a lot of significance in learning about the periodic table, studying it and understanding how it works and how it applies to the world around us. And the same with the clouds. I don't care if you remember the actual name. I care that you know that this type of cloud looks like this and it means this. And it's useful for life, right? Like, Yeah.
So in my variation of that is I care that when you walk out the front door and you look out, you're like, I should bring an umbrella. That's my definition of you are prepared for life. If you walk out the door and you're like, this is not good, I should get an umbrella, right? Or maybe I should check my weather app. I'm content with that. And if my kids are like super cloud interested, go for it. Deep dive on clouds all you freaking want, right? Like I'm game for that. I mean, whatever you're interested in, go as deep as you want to. But if your kid has no interest in clouds and they're saying, why that would have been me. Why do I need to know the names of all these stupid clouds? I'm struggling as an adult to justify why I needed to learn all those cloud names even all these years later. So, but if you're keen on learning them, go learn them. I mean, information is interesting as long as you're finding it interesting and you're good. Go. That's the
Yeah.
best time ever.
So much of what this whole conversation is about, right? If you're having fun and you're enjoying learning it, then you're doing it right, right?
Mhm.
And if you're not enjoying what you're learning, if it's a struggle, if you're fighting all of the time, if there's constantly tension between you and your kiddos over what you're trying to teach them, then you're not homeschooling right. And you need to find a better way to do it for you. And this particular topic highlights how very different our two homes are, and that's okay, right? I mean, like we said, this isn't about human rights. It's okay for us to have different ideas about the way that
We
we
can
choose
disagree about clouds.
how you feel. It's okay. All right.
Yeah. And sorry, I was just going to say, I brought it up in a previous episode. I'm not here to say Steve Jobs is like the greatest human being on earth. He's a complex individual, just like the rest of us. But I brought it up at one point that he at one point was taking all these calligraphy classes at Reed College in California. And I heard him give a speech at Stanford where he said it had no practical hope for application in his life. And then it did, right? When he created, the iPhone and all this kind of stuff, he was like, he called upon all of that random stuff that he wasn't even a registered student. He was auditing the classes and sitting in the back for free. So yeah, if you're enjoying it, to Amanda's point, go enjoy it, right? I mean, you never know when the stuff that you enjoy will cycle back. Our conversation is more about when your kids are not enjoying it and they're like, why the heck am I doing this? So it's finding that balance. Everything in homeschooling is balance.
Yeah, it totally is. So, I mean, right, exactly. Where do we find the balance of covering our bases and also spending our time wisely, arming our kids with information they'll actually need in the real world? And, again, I think that this varies by home and what you personally have experienced and what you envision the world looking like for your children, or the world where you think your children will live and thrive as adults, right? So for me, in my life, I just think, education was what allowed me to greatly improve my situation in life. And I can't think of any class that I took in school at any point outside of physical education. I think physical education, for the most part, is an absolute joke, but that's a whole other story. I can't think of any class that I'm like, oh, that was a terrible class and I wish I hadn't taken it. I can think back on so many classes that I absolutely loved taking and learning. And so that plays in our home, right? All of these, we're going to learn this and we're going to do that. For us, I think the difference is whether we are doing more of a survey level class on something versus a deep dive, right? If we're only learning it because it's a new thing that we don't know, so we want to learn about it, the basics, then it's a survey level class. If it's something we're really interested in, we're going to be doing more deep dive and intensive things. I was kind of thinking about, when I was thinking about this question specifically, and applying it to social studies and science in elementary and middle school. I so often see parents being like, our elementary science or our elementary social studies or elementary history, it's not challenging enough. It's not detailed enough. It doesn't go in depth enough. And it's like, well, look, it's not supposed to. Science and social studies and history in elementary school is really just supposed to provide the basics, an introduction. So kids have an idea it's there, they have an idea of how it works, they are kind of introduced to the vocabulary. But no one expects your 5, 6, 7-year-old to remember all of the vocabulary and how all of it works together. It's just an introduction. And then in middle school, you cover it again and they learn a little bit more. And then a lot of times in high school, you cover it again and they really learn a lot, right? And so I think it's that finding that balance between like which things are we going to leave at an elementary to middle school level. Hey, you've had exposure to it, you get the basic idea of it. And which things are we going to say, okay, these are the areas you're really going to dive into and really accumulate a large amount of knowledge around this. And at the same time, especially because we're homeschooling, we're allowed, not even allowed, really encouraged in the community to bring back those life skills, right? When I was in school, there was absolutely home ec and cooking classes and sewing classes and automotive classes and all of those kinds of things. And there's a there's just not enough of that anymore, but we're homeschooling. We can absolutely reintroduce those things. We're not having to cut that because the school budget isn't there. We can make sure that our kiddos are learning budgeting and recipes that are actually healthy that they can take with them when they leave home, and how to do the laundry and general home ec and, oh, God forbid, sex education, like all of these things we can do, we can include.
Okay, I gotta go back. You've never taken a class in school that you didn't enjoy. Did you take trigonometry?
Um, I did, and it was
You
probably
enjoyed trigonometry.
it was my hardest. I will say it was the hardest math class I had to take. But
Did not
I
enjoy that.
still was glad that I did it, and I like and I mean, I got an A in it, so I was glad I did it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just, it's
I've
fine. It's
never
a
used
problem.
the sine cosine ever in my whole life. Ever. You know, I literally look back. I can visualize the room I took trig in and just sat there and was like, what the hell am I doing here? Right? Like, never.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, right? Like, then I took statistics in college, which was a similar situation, right? And I'm like, I was thinking about it. Now it was different. I finished college. I did my first 2 years. Then I had some party time. And then I finished my last 2 years later. So I was working when I finished my last 2 years. I was working at a pharmaceutical company. They paid for me to finish my degree. And I was interesting because I was taking statistics and working in this world where I needed a lot of data. I was making tons of data informed decisions. We had an entire reporting department, right? We had 12 people in my building alone who just ran reports. And so I could go and say, I need this, this, and this contrasted against this, this, and this. But I need to remove these 3 variables and highlight these 2 variables. And they were like, no problem. And somebody who loved statistics in school, would be my guess, built that report and it got delivered to my email every single morning. And all I needed to know as a professional was how to read the report and utilize the data. Right. And so when I was, kind of devising our homeschool journey, it was like, okay, if you have a kid who loves that level of data, right? If you're in Amanda's house and you just want to learn all of it, awesome, right? But if you're not, and genuinely, right, if you're
Yeah.
struggling, you're a salmon swimming upstream and you have a kid who's not a super like gung-ho learner or whatever, who's saying like, why do I need to learn this? If you have a kid who despises statistics, they're not going to work in the data reporting department. They're not. Right? You're never going to take that kid and have them in the data reporting department. They're going to be a person who maybe uses the data to do the thing that they actually love to do. And so they need to learn how to read data. Do they need to know how to formulate all those statistics? No. And to be honest with you, statistics now is a Google sheet, right? I mean, so much of it is knowing how to access in a Google sheet, which we're going to, ironically, about to talk about kind of converting education to life. That was one of my next topics. So I kind of got myself there, even though I didn't even realize I was doing it. All right. So since I couldn't find any decent studies on this topic, I decided to hit up ChatGPT. My brain was just like noodling, right? And so I asked ChatGPT a bunch of questions. I brought one as an example. So it says, I asked ChatGPT, I said, if a kid is struggling with their calculus homework and asks their parent, when am I ever going to use this? Can enough justification for the use of calculus in the adult world be made to satisfy their frustration? So it brought me some interesting stuff, not one way or another, just interesting stuff. So it said, be honest and direct about use in everyday life. It said, for most people, calculus isn't something they use daily, but that doesn't mean it's useless. If they plan to go into engineering, physics, economics, computer science, architecture, or even fields like medical research or environmental science, calculus is a foundational tool. So that's amazing, right? If you have a kid who has this incredible goal, I have a kid who I think might go into some sort of like conservation research. And that's a huge motivating factor for him to learn everything and soak up all the math knowledge he possibly can. So that might be a tool that is helpful. It says, then the next bullet point that it gave me, I loved. It said, if they're going into a field where calculus isn't directly needed, they might never use it explicitly, but that can be said for a lot of school subjects. Thank you, ChatGPT. I concur.
That's it.
So I did laugh when it spit that out.
I'm going to take this to Amanda. I'm going to take this to Amanda and make her eat her words.
Okay. Then it said one way that you could alleviate a student's frustration is to explain to them how calculus shows up in unexpected places. Like, doesn't that sound so intriguing? So it says, even if someone doesn't actively do calculus in their job, its concepts are behind a lot of things that we take for granted, like animation and video games, which I thought was a great first example because we always see, like, I have a kid who's super interested in gaming and it's hard to get them interested in anything else, right? So it says, Pixar and video game developers use calculus to create smooth movements, realistic physics, and lighting effects. It talks about medicine and biology, which seems like a pretty obvious option for calculus, finance and economics, which also seems like a pretty obvious thing for calculus, and then sports and engineering. Now, I did think, I must be honest, I didn't run this search with enough time to ask, but I have a friend whose husband is a head coach in the NFL, and I so wanted to message her if I thought I could have gotten a message back in time for recording, because it says, want to know how to throw a perfect spiral in football. And I was like, I can guarantee you that he and his coaching staff are not breaking down the fundamentals of calculus. It's a lot more on the job, right? As far as like, if you position, I don't know anything about football, right? But like, if you position your fingers differently, or you release the ball here, or you twist your body this way or something, is there a foundation is there a calculus foundation there? Perhaps, but it's fairly far removed. So this brought me to an example from our lives. And I'm going to go right out there and say, I'm going to genericize the shit out of this story for the privacy of both of the kiddos who are the examples of the story. Okay. But it's one of them is one of my kids. Okay. So I've changed names, hobbies, etc. But the core principle is it's like an Aesop's fable here. There's a whole underlying story to this genericized version. So here in this fictional version, I have a kid named John who's super into photography. John has a best friend named Kim, also super into photography. So we're unschoolers, right? So John's education when it comes to math and science hasn't been super formal. There's been a lot of interest-driven exposure, a lot of hands-on experience, etc. Bestie Kim goes to school, good student, super good kid, good student, takes all the standard math classes that you would expect from their educational path. However, when there's a real life application issue, guess who Kim is calling for calculations, right? When they're doing astrophotography and they need something super detailed, Kim is calling unschooler John. So Kim's great at the bookwork, but the interesting thing is she still struggles to apply the stuff that she's learning in school to the actual activity. For us, what we're noticing is that there's like a linkage that can be missing. I'm not saying always is missing. It depends on how you're teaching and how your kiddo learns and the types of ways that you're bridging those things, right? So while the examples of calculus being used at Pixar are, I'm sure, are true, thank you, ChatGPT, I would be willing to bet that most of the new hires at Pixar are being flagged because of their qualifications, meaning their degrees and their resumes and things like that. But the skills that they're actually using at Pixar, they're probably getting in training at Pixar. They're not showing up like I aced calculus. And so they sit at their chair at Pixar on the very first day and they know how to do that job. There's a gap between the actual world skill and the bookwork skill in many cases, not all of the time. But I will throw out a disclaimer there that I freely admit that they were probably flagged for the job because of their qualifications. And therein lies the rub that Amanda and I have talked about before, where it's that balancing of formal education, qualifications, life experience, and making sure that we're setting our kids up that when we launch them out into the world or they launch themselves, that balance has to exist, right? Like if they only know bookwork and they've never practically applied anything, it's going to be a tough transition for your kiddo. If your kiddo has had this magical gathering berries and seeds in the forest education and they've loved it, there's probably going to be some gaps there too. It's trying to find that middle ground of how we prepare these humans for the world.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, and that's look, we can sit here and we can talk every week. We'll come here and talk at you and with you about all kinds of things, right? But the end of the day, we are all just trying our best, especially if you're listening to this podcast. I 100% guarantee there are some homeschoolers out there who I question whether or not they're trying their best. But if you're listening to our podcast with us, right, we're all just trying our best to raise good humans that are going to be able to go out and do amazing things without, getting lost in all the other stuff, right? Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, we usually wrap up with a mantra, and we have one for this week. So this week's mantra is we can't guarantee your kid will ever use calculus, but we can guarantee they'll need critical thinking, problem solving, and a really solid BS detector. And let's be honest, that last one is probably the most important.
I do use that quite a bit in adult life. Do you, Amanda?
Yeah. Especially these days, right? Especially these
Jeez
days.
Louise, it's bananas, right?
Yep.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. Let us know your thoughts in the comment. It's a delicate balance. So let us know if you've got advice on the balance, if you've got questions on the balance, come chat with us in our Facebook group, etc., etc. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks for tuning in and happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.